Got it.
Got it.
Welcome, everyone, to a behind-the-scenes look at some of the work of Anna Audette by our former fearless leader, who is no longer leading us, but is incredibly fearless. Louis Audette. All right, share your screen, Louis, and then show off some of Anna's work.
Now, just a minute. I believe, holy smokes. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to
Let that go. That might be yours.
this one and this one.
Okay,
There it is.
good. Yay.
Yay. And the only thing you're seeing is a card with a scrap pile on it.
Right. It's
Right.
right, Louis. It's great.
Abandoned in
Well,
place.
this may work. About the time that Anna died in 2013, it became clear to me that my resolve to get her established as an important female painter of the late 20th century would be sort of my life's task. And so I have been working to place her in museums around the country. And I'm happy to say that there are a number of people that have been very responsive. But the most responsive of all is the show that I hope to host for you out at the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, where they have really put on the dog. Where I normally put a couple of paintings in the back of a car and with movers blankets to take to a gallery. The Florence Griswold Museum sent a straight truck with about 400 feet of bubble pack and took 54 paintings, and they are amazing. Wait till you see how beautifully they are exhibited. The cards are so informative, better than I've ever seen. And so they really are first class, and I think you're going to love the exhibition. But it also occurred to us that you might like to know what Anna was doing before she started being a painter, because her career of over 40 years was largely her training was largely as a printmaker. And so I'm going to take you through some of the early works so you can see how she was able to draw and do prints, and then we'll ease into the painting period. But I thought you might like this because it gives you some background. So here we go. This is Anna, and she, those of you who knew her will remember that she was a very beautiful woman, and she was a great wife. We made it for 49 years. When she was 11, she did this rather doctrinaire picture of barns in Vermont, where she spent the summers with her parents. And this, I believe, is an expression of her an 11-year-old's ability to draw that's pretty remarkable. But there was nothing especially exceptional about it. And the next half of this whole little talk I'm giving you is her struggle to find a muse. She could draw beautifully, and as she got better and better at it, she became looser and more expressive. But when she went to Smith, she studied under Leonard Baskin, and Leonard Baskin was a printmaker, an etcher and engraver, and actually a rather dark person. He was a good friend of her father's, and she fell deeply under his influence. And so for the first 5 or 6 years, 7 years of her career, she did prints, etchings and engravings, some woodcuts, of rather dour and dark subjects. This is the Tower of Babel. And he was not a happy guy, extremely intelligent, and I think was a terrific teacher of technique. But the themes that she brought to her printmaking were generally dark and sad. When she came to Yale to join the art school in 19 61, actually 62. This was her first print under Gabor Petterty at Yale. It's of that great big tortoise that was at the Peabody Museum. Now that the place has been rebuilt and reconditioned, I'm not sure they are exhibiting this huge fossil turtle anymore, but this was a drawing or a printmaking, what am I trying to say here, a intaglio, an etching that she made for the Peabody. And it was there for a little while. I think it's now probably in their storerooms. She and I had some trouble with I by that time had graduated from Yale undergraduate and was going through the art school as well as she was. But we were having a lot of trouble with the fact that the visiting critics, largely from New York, were minimalist artists who didn't know how to draw. They could use paint rollers and daubs and blobs of paint, but they had no idea of rendering, and she was really able to draw very well. So we went over to the anatomy department to study from the cadavers the way the old masters did. And she did a very much in keeping, I think, with it wasn't exactly, hers was not a morbid curiosity, but the topics of her etchings and drawings for about 2 years had an awful lot to do with what we saw in the anatomy department. Some of you know that actually I switched over and got a master's in anatomy and taught it for a while at Yale, and then went on to another quite varied career. Now, when she was doing these things, one of my aunts who lived on Prospect Street was very anxious to get a picture from her that she could put in her living room, but it certainly wasn't going to be one of these. And so she did this woodcut for my Aunt Cornelia Day. This is a woodcut of an apple tree that we have in Vermont. And that's done by carving on a flat piece of wood without any particular grain, and then inking it and rubbing Japanese rice paper on it. Much later on, she, in an effort to accommodate her students who couldn't pay for expensive things like rice paper, she discovered that you could buy tea bag paper in vast industrial rolls. And so we have been working for the entire length of my marriage to her through a roll of tea bag paper that she would take to Southern, where she was teaching printmaking, so they could make woodcuts themselves without having to shell out for paper that cost $3 a sheet. The anatomy ultimately resolved itself into another big interest of hers, which was armor. And there are a series of drawings and etchings of various armor groups and pieces of armor. And they're around in some of your living rooms, I suspect, because she was beginning to have some sales in those days. But you're going to see that she was flopping around pretty hard, trying to come up with a topic that wasn't grim like the Baskin stuff and would be her own métier. This is a drawing of a minotaur. I mean, actually, it's a lithograph of a minotaur. It's also me. I was the model for this. And she did this as a book illustration. She got several, not a huge number, but commissions for books. And this was a book of mythology. And that's me pretending to be a big bull. We started to travel around the country, and she began to develop an interest in industrial settings. I suspect at the time in the 60s, this was still a working coal tipple. It's a woodcut on, by that time, on tea bag paper, but it's carved on a sheet of wood. And this is the interior of a machine shop in Vermont. It's a tricky thing. It's not very well focused, I'm sorry. I had to draw these from some places that did not lend themselves to an easy transfer. But this was a sort of a trick thing because she actually used the same plate twice, but inverted it in a slightly different color. And some of you who own this print know what I'm talking about. It's an interesting approach of sort of looking through. You're going to hear me saying looking through and in between a lot, because that became one of her stocks in trade. This is an etching of a greenhouse. It's quite big. It's about 4 feet wide, and that's now at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And she was quite interested in experimental stuff, so she made this clay relief in plain, regular, wet clay. And then I helped her make a casting of it using epoxy. And we then turned the casting over so that we had a negative space. And she soaked print paper in it, Arches paper, and then we squashed the paper down into that cavity using blankets on her etching press, so that this etching of an Indian's face was done in relief. There's no ink here. It's just, you're seeing it, the shadow of that. And while she was at it, she started figuring out fun things for her students to do. So she talked the highway department into loaning them a asphalt roller. And these are her students making a great big woodcut on a full sheet of plywood and using a steamroller, a asphalt roller for the pressure she needed to squash that into the plywood and get the relief. So she was forever looking around for these tricks, and she was pretty good at twisting arms, as you will see. She could get a asphalt roller on demand if she wanted it. And you will see at one point she also had a small arsenal here because the cops liked what she was doing. She began to be much more interested in how things were constructed. It may go all the way back to the anatomy days. But here, I think it's on the Penobscot River, are 2 barges that only become evident at high tide. I'm sorry, low tide. So they emerge, and you can see the ribbing and the structure of the decks. They'll be underwater again in another 8 hours, 12 hours. We went to Egypt during she was able, it was by that time in her 7th year at Southern as a teacher of drawing and printmaking. And she was able to do engravings and etchings and lithographs, in this case, of temples. And she had seized on a technique which was actually using a sort of an ersatz transparency. The fact that this temple is partially flooded is implied by the hatching at the bottom, which is the water, and then you don't see the temple columns done in their full solid relief. You're actually looking through the columns and seeing other ones behind it to imply how she was dealing with space. And this is a thing that will begin to appear more and more in her techniques. But she didn't also get out of drawing not so much figures, but certainly animals. This is a water buffalo that you would not have found in pharaonic Egypt. They didn't introduce them until actually the Islamic incursion into the first one into Egypt. So these animals were introduced to Egyptian culture probably in the 700 or 800 AD. But this is a large lithograph with a water buffalo, a gamusa, as we know them, in front of her capture of the kinds of bovines that you would see in a tomb painting. Quite different looking cows and bulls altogether. As time went on, she began to notice industrial scenes, and this is a picture a drawing actually of chalk and graphite of the workings of a refinery out in California, you can see that it's getting to be a far cry from the Great Turtle, but more and more industrial. And one day she found herself in a junkyard and absolutely was smitten by the changes in what nicely crafted mechanical objects like automobiles were going through as they went into decline and deterioration. And so this is a drawing of a stack of cars. This one at the bottom is essentially kind of an abstraction. The middle one is what she found in the junkyards, and so is the top one. But she began to think, these things which are in decline and decay, although I deplored the word decay because it seemed to me to imply a degree of becoming rotten, which was not what she sought at all. She was looking at the decline and the changes in color and shape and texture of these things as they were being let go. Now, one of her idols was a guy named Charles Sheeler, who did drawings, but also paintings of the Ford Motor Company in 1939 and 35. Sheeler's drawings were tributes to the height of American industry at its greatest. And she, Anna, by the time she got into American industry, she was actually the bookend at the other end of the bookshelf. She was showing what it was like when it had fallen into neglect in respect of progress, where really nicely made things were simply allowed to be sent out to pasture and left. And that, in fact, became her muse. That was her theme. And once she found that, she was on her way. But that didn't really happen until about 1980. I told you to look between things, and she would go to truck stops and look between the trucks and pick up various views, so that almost everything was given its degree of depth by having this look through and behind and past objects in the foreground. On the other hand, she was very attentive to what was happening in those days. This was in about 1980. I think this is the F.D. Graves Tobacco Company, but you couldn't have seen it from this view until they tore down the Coliseum. And there, believe it or not, there are some sentimental aspects to her paintings. This is her mother's favorite chair, which is still at our house, and we love this picture. I told you that she was able to get, very briefly, a small arsenal from the police. I want to tell you the name of this painting, but it's a still life, rather ironic, I think, in its subject. It was when New Haven was going through a bad time, and this actually has an allusion to a 19th century still life painting, but for the life of me, in my dotage, I can't remember the name of the picture since I'm doing this extemporaneously. But this picture got snapped up quickly by somebody who really saw the irony in it. She became a good friend, and he became a strong patron of Anna, and he being Michael Chavone at the big scrap yard out in North Haven. It used to be called the alchemists because they changed dross into gold. And he would get scrap metal and smash it up and bale it and send it around the world. And she did a long series of pictures of his scrap metal. And I think her scrap metal paintings are the ones that come to the mind for most people who think of her when she was at the height of her powers, because she saw what Charles Sheeler suggested, which is to paint things realistically, but imply abstraction as you're doing it. This is a bridge in Belgium. Once again, her idea of painting a bridge was to look through it in an unusual pose. It's obviously not a bridge that is bridging anything because it's in its folded up position. She was invited after she'd done enough of this so that she could show people what she was after to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona a couple of times, actually, and she would walk past these serried rows of beautifully arranged fighter planes, generally being preserved in the hot desert sun, but for reuse in other air forces. She would walk right past them and go to the breaker yards in the back where the planes were being dismantled and taken apart for recycling. And this is a picture that's hanging in one of my daughter's living rooms of the kind of scenes that she found most appealing in terms of, again, saying, look at this beautiful thing we built and what we have allowed it to become as our industry goes into decline. This is another view from Davis-Monthan. She had a fascination with helicopters, as some of you may remember I did too, and she got into the habit of doing these kinds of paintings with the subjects bow to stern or front to tail. So we see the back of we see the front of an S-58 helicopter, a helicopter from the 50s. And it's a marine helicopter, so it was meant to be shipborne. And for that purpose, their tails folded up. So what you see in the foreground of this picture is the folded tail of the same kind of helicopter, but it's parked in the other direction. And she did that at Suisun Bay in north of San Francisco with a big reserve freight of old freighters, where she was taken around by a tug that the Navy loaned her, and the driver couldn't understand what she was finding that was so interesting at the waterline. She did do a number of paintings of what was up on the decks as well, but the purpose of this reserve fleet was to take a lot of stuff across the Pacific if they had to mobilize very quickly. But they've never used it, and now I doubt if they could start most of those ships, and they are quite, it's just a whole different kind of warfare now, and they are decommissioning and scrapping the ships. If you wonder what those tangs, those objects on the underside of the hull are for, in those days, if you had to change a propeller while you were at sea, you could hang cables off of those and pull the propeller off and hoist it up on the deck with the deck crane. When she was invited to NASA for 2 shuttle launches, she went with a bunch of professional commercial artists, and she absolutely loved them. She said they were the nicest guys, absolutely approachable, where fine artists were she said these guys were so kind. They taught her how to paint chrome, and while they were taking and photographs and then drawing pictures as part of the commission that NASA gave them of things like the reflection of the American flag in a space helmet's faceplate, she of course had to go around to the back and do a huge painting of the big tracked loader, the machine that carries the rockets from the assembly building out to the launch tower. This is now hanging in Houston. I just put this in because it seems to remind me of how she and I spent what must have been the last 15 years of her career as a painter, which was getting through broken fences and sneaking into places and taking pictures of factories in decrepit states. There's a very good one of hers that most of you probably have seen in the New Haven Museum at the foot of the stairs of the Bigelow Boiler Factory, which used to be down on, I guess, the street that is, I guess it would be Water Street. But in any case, this was something we had to do. She would bring along a sheaf of the photographs that she had of paintings that she'd done, And if a watchman caught us, we'd usually get thrown out. But if we could find out who the bosses were, we usually were given permission to go back in and make pictures of the factory interiors. This is one of them. This is the inside of one of the Winchester buildings in what became Science Park. This building's no longer there, but I've always loved it because it has much of the same color and shape and look to me of a Netherlandish painting, a 16th century painting of the inside of a cathedral. And I think, in fact, it's now at the American collection at the New Britain Museum, but that's how they gave it that title, because they saw the same similarity. We were one of the last people to get into Bethlehem Steel before they started tearing the plants down. And once again, we're looking between a small, they call them tugs. It's a very, very small locomotive that pulls pieces of ore and scrap around. And so we're looking across the front of that. There's its, if I can get in here, this is its headlight. And we're looking, it's parked underneath a grill work, so that these are the shadows cast by the pieces of things that you walk on that grill work platform above. But you're actually looking past the front to the building behind it. Every now and then, these would be sort of stop the car moments as we would be driving out west, and she would find one of these parked obsolete snowplows. Nowadays, all those big snowplows they use in the Pacific states and in the prairies look like great big snow blowers with fans on the front. But in the days that these were in use, this type of machine, this part folded out so it could get quite wide, and that was what they used to clear the tracks. Much of her abstraction was done basically by doing close-ups. This is the side of an International diesel tractor, and this is the what it looks like if you're only a foot and a half away. I think this is actually in one of my daughter's dining rooms. She would find these vestiges of old industries. This is just the boom of a steam shovel. Some people don't know they hardly any of them work with steam anymore. But the difference between a shovel and an excavator is the fact that the bucket that is out at this end of this machine faces outward. If it was an excavator, it would face towards the driver, and the digging would be done by pulling it towards one. She found this deep in the woods, and it's just the boom. And so now this is at the Slate Museum in Eastern New York. And finally, we come to my favorite picture of hers. It's not very big. It's most of you who have been in my house have seen it in my kitchen. And that sort of brings you to the point that I wanted to reach at the end of this. You saw her go from a variety of different approaches that really kind of went nowhere. She did continue to be a teacher of printmaking and drawing at Southern for her entire career. She went there and it was a beloved teacher, an important teacher for many, many people who had no idea that they could go on to graduate careers in the fine arts. And another thing that happened was that she would often go to, when kids graduated, she would go and find out who employed them and ask what they were doing now. And by and large, the employers would say, we particularly like former art students because they solve problems. If the printer needs toner, if the bulbs need to be changed, they do it instead of waiting around for the office manager, the way business majors would be doing. And so I've kept this as one of my favorite paintings of hers. I think it embodies an awful lot of what we've been talking about. And the final slide here is to tell you that she now has a completely revamped website, which has over 1,000 images in it. It's got a huge number of thumbnails. You click on them and they get big. You'll see almost all of her paintings. Not quite all of her drawings. I found a bunch more recently. But this will also give you some more biographical information about her. And having brought you to this point, just let me tell you how delighted I am that you've listened to this, and to the extent that most of you can find the time, I'd love to take you on Thursday and show you this absolutely spot-on exhibition of her paintings that are out in Old Lyme. So thanks a lot.
Thank
So
you.
there you have it.
Does anybody have any questions? I muted everybody during the talk, and so unmute yourselves and raise your hand if you have any questions or a comment or anything. Judith, yes.
Hi, I that was wonderful, Louis. I'm delighted you did it. I'm wondering if when you were in some of these places far from home, if you took pictures or she took pictures, and then came home and worked on things, or whether she stood there and made paintings.
She never could make paintings in those places. Usually she
Okay.
wasn't allowed in until if they were still in operation, like the Chavone scrap metal yard,
Yeah.
she couldn't go there during working hours at all.
Okay.
So the answer to that is that she was very fastidious about taking her own pictures, by George. She
Really, you didn't take them. She did, huh?
no, I played basically I was the guard. I stood at the church door while she stood on the altar.
Okay. That's a great image. Thanks.
Did she do any junkyards, Louis?
She did junkyards, but
I found them fascinating.
I gave the junkyards were almost always relatively selective pictures afterwards. She,
Yeah.
as you will see in the museum, one of her favorite topics was a big agricultural junkyard with scrapped tractors and stuff outside of Albany. And every time we went west, we always had to go and stop in that place and take another 150 pictures. Now, some of you know that she died of a form of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, and she had an adult student who remembered that she had all those pictures and got her back into the studio, and she did 120 more paintings. And then gradually they turned into drawings and then scribbles. And I'm not going to talk much about them now. They do have their place, and they have an element of diagnostic value, because while she was doing those paintings, I was taking and dating them quite carefully, and she was also having brain scans, and they could see changes in her brain that might have corresponded to the pictures. But that's a whole nother topic. It's almost a second career. The pictures in the main are buoyant and happy, and if you think that while there's elegance and reserve to her paintings at the height of her powers, these really show her soul. So we'll do another one someday, and I'll let you see the ones that she did after she got sick.
Are any of them in the show, Louis?
No.
Okay. I didn't think so, but yeah.
So anybody else?
Louis,
Louis,
did
she consider herself part of a school or a group of painters that was doing these kinds of pictures at the time, paintings?
Well, I don't think that she coined the term because it was already in existence, but by the time she was doing these things and was beginning to get picked up by galleries and museums, and by galleries, I mean mainly private collections, she was known as a precisionist. A precisionist is somebody that paints almost realistically, but it again, because of the selection and the points of view, tend to have an element of abstraction about their works.
Mm. Okay.
And her materials were oils in those, all of those?
They were all oils, yes. When she was younger, she did watercolors sometimes, but you can imagine that she put in about 15 solid years of being monochrome as a printmaker,
Sure.
with a rare event that she might use two plates with different color inks. But it was kind of amazing that all of a sudden everything started coming out in color, and she, in terms of her own private engagement, was a painter and basically a teacher of printmaking to her students, many of whom were sent on into careers in the arts, whether it was as artists or printers, commercial printing. And they were, in many cases, being at Southern, they were the first people to go to college at all in their families. And she saw to it that they were encouraged and helped.
It's kind of a crazy question, I suppose, a little bit. How many paintings of this latter, how many paintings did she make? Sounds like she did an incredible number of them.
I think there are, altogether, there are over 1,000 examples of her artwork. And I would say that there were probably close to half of them were paintings.
Yeah. Amazing.
She could knock them out pretty fast. She never did more than one at a time, but she would do them and then move on to the next one, almost entirely, as I've told you, from photographs. Even from situations where they didn't have to be from photographs. It could have been something where she could have painted plain, but didn't.
What was her setup like when she used a photograph? Was it always a print, and how big was it? Or was it sometimes a projection?
She did it by making a grid. And so she would draw a small grid on the photograph after picking out the parts she wanted to do. And sometimes she would cut up the photographs and recombine them with things that weren't even there as in juxtaposition. And then once she had come up with a usable theme, a topic that was the subject she wanted to paint, more or less in its entirety, she would then make a bigger grid on the canvas. And as most of you know, her canvases are generally quite large. 50 and
started with just like a 5x8 print in normal size.
Right.
Okay. Interesting.
You'll see some of those photographs at the Griswold Museum. They really went out of their way to not only, as I say, do marvelous title cards, quite extensive, it'd take a long time if you ever read them all, but they did things like taking her hard hat, and they so that there are other things on exhibit, including a couple of examples of what the photographs looked like before she did the painting.
Wow.
Well, I'm at your service. Okay. Yes, my dear. Our new fearless leader.
Yeah. I was just say that we hope that more people will sign up for the trip on Thursday. And Kate will be sending out a notification one more time to alert the whole membership. And then we're encouraging people to carpool. I think you probably know that. And there'll be an opportunity to have lunch together somewhere afterwards. Apparently the museum lunch area is outdoors, so this could be an issue on Thursday. But if you have any questions about the trip on Thursday, please call the office and let us know if you're interested in coming. We hope you will.
I plan to be there. I may have to be, shall I say, have ambulatory assistance because I just had a back operation on Friday. But it wasn't a very big one, and while I didn't jog home the way they said I might, I seemed to be pretty hale. I just saw my doctor today, and I may not even need to use my cane on. So I'll be there. You betcha.
Are you gonna take us around if you're there, or is somebody else gonna do that, or do we just do it on our own?
I think
Which would
you
be
might.
fine.
I think that if anybody wants to hear more of from me, they can clump around me. But my experience in museums is it's much more fun to go by yourself and then come
Right.
back and remind
Okay.
people of things that you like to see. I couldn't imagine leading a tour. It'd be so turgid and boring. It'd be awful.
Not likely, but still. Thanks.
Louis, this was just a wonderful presentation. You are such a great teacher. Thank you. I have never heard this story coming come later into Home Haven, so I really appreciate this sort of chronological approach you took and with the background. Thank you.
Well, I'm so sorry that some of you never met her. She was quite a remarkable person.
Mhm.
When I was very immature, recently married, being a dreadful person, I had a temper tantrum of some kind in our kitchen, and stormed to the back door, marched across the backyard, about to get in the car and lay a big strip down the driveway, when she grabbed me by the back of my shirt and my collar, flung me to the ground, and said, "Grow up, stop being a baby." And I did. From that point on, I stopped being a baby and I grew up.
A lesson for our younger contemporaries.
I often refer to her as my hidden flywheel, and she really was. Every time I got in a jam, I'd say, "Hey, sell a painting," and she'd pull us through.
What year did you get married, Louis?
1964. Okay, thanks.
Thank you all for coming.